Martha Marie Morrison. In Eugene, Oregon, Martha Marie Morrison was born in 1956. She was raised in foster care. Martha went to the Corvallis Farm School and Roosevelt High School in Portland. She then traveled to Arizona to take part in the Job Corps initiative. Martha had a past filled with drug abuse and escapes from the homes of her foster and biological families. She was last observed going to her family on September 1st, 1974, together with a man she lived with in a flat. After arguing with the man, Martha vanished from sight. At the time, she was 17 years old. The human remains of two women were discovered in Dole Valley, close to Vancouver, Washington, approximately 35 days after Martha was last seen on October 12, 1974. The victims' bones were analyzed across the country after their bodies were found in an effort to identify them. Dental records rapidly allowed for the identification of one of the victims as 18-year-old Carol Platt Valenzuela. After hitchhiking to Vancouver on August 2, 1970, Carol failed to return home, and her husband filed a missing persons report on August 4, 1970, hoped that maybe identifying her would make it more likely that the second victim would also be identified. They meant to question Carol's husband, but at the time he was recuperating from an overdose of aspirin. On October 25, 1974, he was taken into custody and subsequently freed after passing a polygraph exam. The second victim could not be identified by any examination. Her age was reported to be between 20 and 25 years old, and she was white. The victim's frontal and profile forensic facial reconstructions were produced, and they were published in a newspaper. However, the general people failed to notice it. The victim's physical characteristics were also mentioned, such as her curly textured hair and issues with her oral hygiene. It also looked as though she had given birth at some point. After the first discovery, police were sent back to the area and given orders to perhaps gather further evidence. A brand new metal detector that was borrowed the two victims' autopsies revealed that they had been dead for at least 2 weeks when they were discovered. Decomposition and animal activity made determining the source a challenge. However, officials have always assumed that they were murdered. Patty Hearst was among the several people who were thought to be the second victim at the time, but was subsequently discovered to be alive. Over the years, the case has been connected to a number of serial criminals, including Gary Ridgway, Warren Leslie Forrest, and the guy whose name we can't reveal on YouTube. The second victim, who is still unidentified, had a DNA profile created by detectives in 2012. Then, a large number of family members who had a female relative go missing had their DNA gathered. A genetic profile of Martha Morrison was created using DNA samples from her sister and half-brother, which were then compared to possible matches. It was contrasted with the second victim's DNA. Though similarities were observed, a definitive match could not be found. Eventually, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, an organization dedicated to finding the missing and identifying human remains, became involved. They were able to officially confirm that Martha Morrison was the second victim discovered in July of 2015. Subsequently, the investigators turned their attention back to apprehending the individual who killed Martha and Carol. They investigated Forrest, Warren Leslie. As of right now, he is serving a prison sentence for the July 1974 murder of Christakea Blake. October 2, 1974, was Forrest's arrest date. This was only 10 days before Martha and Carol's remains were discovered. DNA testing was done by law enforcement on a bloodstain discovered on Forrest's air pistol, which was originally thought to belong to a different woman, one of the 6 targets he assaulted while he was on the run. In 2019, the results of the DNA test verified that the blood on Forrest's gun belonged to Martha. He was also a suspect in the disappearances of Jamie Grissom in 1970 and Diane Gilchrist in 1974. The trial of 73-year-old Warren Forrest began in 2023. After barely 90 minutes of deliberation, The jury convicted him guilty of all the accusations brought against him on February 1st. His sentencing is scheduled for February 17, 2023. To determine whether Forrest was also accountable for other cases, investigators are still working on those cases. Moving on to the next case. Nancy Noga. Nancy Noga, then 17 years old, resided in Saraville, New Jersey in 1999. She was a Saraville high school student. Nancy started working at a rack shop in the neighboring town of Altbridge, New Jersey, on January 7th. Her family became concerned when she did not return home and contacted the police. They distributed flyers and started looking right away. Nancy's body was discovered 5 days later, at roughly 9 in the morning, in a forested area near Ernston Road's Minimal Plaza shopping center. She was discovered with a purple rucksack, blue trousers, black and white platform trainers, a dark V-neck jumper, and a purple Arizona jacket on. At a crime scene, a man's unidentified DNA was obtained. Nancy died from blunt force trauma, according to an autopsy. Nancy was characterized by her friends as a pleasant, gregarious, helpful, and sociable girl. After high school, she intended to enlist in the military and then go to college. The blue-collar community was stunned to find her body. Fear spread swiftly, especially among the town's girls who dared not go out alone after dark. Investigators worked the case for more than 20 years, but they were never able to apprehend the suspect. Advancements were possible just lately since researchers began using genetic genealogy. Middlesex County Prosecutor Yolanda Sykin and several police chief John Zabrowski declared to the public in September of 2021 that an investigation was closed. In relation to the crime, Bruce Szymanski, 49, was taken into custody at his Barnicot, New Jersey, residence. His genetic makeup matched that of a murder scene. While awaiting trial, he is being detained at the Middlesex County Adult Corrections Center. John Zabrowski, in other words, this arrest represents the culmination of many years of arduous labor by numerous detectives and law enforcement personnel. We never stopped investigating leads, and today, with Bruce Szymanski's apprehension, we have taken a step towards providing the family with some kind of justice and closure. Moving on to the next case. Marlene Warren. On May 26, 1990, Marlene Warren, then 40 years old, was enjoying breakfast in her West Palm Beach, Florida, home with her son. Marlene resided in the Wellington Aero Club, a private aviation club, with her spouse and kid. Marlene heard a knock on the door at approximately 10:45. A figure in a clown outfit stood in front of her when she stood up and opened the door. The clown had his face painted white, a red bulb nose, and an orange wig on. In addition to a bunch of red and white flowers, the clown was carrying 2 balloons. "You're the best," said one of the balloons. Marlene accepted the balloon and flowers from the clown. Marlene responded, "Oh, how pretty," accepting the gifts. The clown then instantly produced a gun and fired a .38 or a .357 caliber revolver, striking her in the face once. As Marlene hit the ground, her son hurried up to her and gave the clown a direct look. He recalls the clown's eyes to be dark brown. After that, the clown approached a Chrysler LeBron that was parked in front of the house with composure and departed. There was no license plate on the car. 2 days after being admitted to the hospital, Marlene passed away. Police discovered during their inquiry that Marlene and her husband, Michael Warren, had been fighting and experiencing relationship issues. After 20 years of marriage, the pair had purchased a few enterprises, including a used car shop that Michael operated and rental homes managed by Marlene that commanded a price tag of over $1 million. Since Michael would have profited the most from Marlene's death, the police quickly accused her husband. Marlene was the name attached to the couple's houses and enterprises, and the police surmised that her husband wanted her out of the picture in order to inherit their wealth. The cops discovered the clown's Chrysler LeBaron 4 days after the murder. It was parked at the intersection of Okeechobee and Royal Palm Beach Boulevard in a Winn-Dixie parking lot. Inside the automobile, the police did not find much evidence. The rifle was missing, as was the costume. Nevertheless, they did discover orange hair strands inside the vehicle, which they saved for more investigation. Police soon received a tip directing them to investigate Sheila Keene. Sheila Keene, a 27-year-old woman, handled vehicle repossessions for Michael's automotive company. There had been speculations that Michael was having an affair with her, and she had recently separated from her husband. Keene's neighbors claimed to have seen Michael visiting Keene's flat multiple times. The couple regularly had long lunches together, and other staff members informed the police that Michael had also begun to pay her rent. Sheila Keene and Michael Keene, however, both refute any romantic involvement between them. On the day of the murder, Michael had an alibi since he and a few pals were traveling to the Calder racetrack. Then, Sheila Keene came under police attention. Keene stated that she had been searching for cars to seize on the day of the murder. She denied having anything to do with the case. Not too long after, the costume shop called the police. They claimed that a few days prior, a woman had purchased a clown outfit. Keene was selected from a picture lineup by the shop employee. Additionally, the police were informed that a Publix supermarket shop sold the balloons and the flowers. After asking the Publix grocery store staff about the shooting, they confirmed that the identical kind of balloons and flowers had been bought at 9:22 a.m. on the day of the incident. The staff verified that the balloons and flowers were purchased from the store by a woman who fit Keene's description. It was close to Keene's apartment, the business. Police discovered orange hair strands in Keene's apartment that matched the ones discovered in the abandoned automobile. In spite of this, the police lacked sufficient evidence to make an arrest, and the investigation would ultimately fizzle out. However, Michael Warren was taken into custody for a separate offense. On 43 counts of odometer manipulation, grand theft, and racketeering, he was given a 5-year jail sentence. In 1997, he was granted freedom from prison. In the end, Michael and Keene would tie the knot in 2002. They relocated to Southwest Virginia, close to the border with Tennessee, and started a fast food business. In 2016, they sold the company. The police began reopening the case in 2013. They began doing DNA tests on evidence gathered years earlier and conducted new interviews with witnesses. Testing in 2017 showed that the orange hair strands found in the La Baron matched those found in Keene's apartment. However, it would take 3 years. Additionally, they discovered matches between her hair and the hair in the vehicle. Sheila Keene was apprehended and charged with first-degree murder 27 years after the incident. The next hearing for her trial has been scheduled for December 22, 2022, after it was postponed multiple times. Although Michael has not been accused with killing Marlene, he has also not been excluded as a possibility. Moving on to the next case. Kelly Ann Broser. Kelly Ann Broser, age 8, and her family resided in Columbus, Ohio. Kelly Ann was making her way home on foot from Indianola Elementary School on September 20th, 1982. She was kidnapped somewhere in the Columbus University District between her house and a school. Linda Prosser, Kaylee Ann's mother, became concerned when she did not come home. When she called the school, they were unaware of her whereabouts. After that, the police were summoned, and her hunt was underway. Then, on the 22nd, 2 days later, Kaylee Ann's body was discovered in a neighboring Madison County cornfield. She had been choked and beaten. The cops in Columbus started a thorough investigation. To be used at a later time, they stored all of the evidence from the crime site. Numerous persons were questioned by the police department as well, but regrettably, they were unable to obtain any pertinent information, and the matter was abandoned. 2015 saw the addition of DNA from a crime scene to the Cody's database. Regretfully, the database yielded no matches. The police advanced DNA, a forensic genealogy research firm, in March 2020. With the help of a DNA sample, the company was able to create a potential suspect's family tree and supply the investigators with more clues. Harold Warren Jarrell was eventually identified by the police after more DNA testing and investigative work. Harold also adopted an 8-year-old girl in Columbus in 1977. 8 months before Gilly Ann was kidnapped, in January 1982, he was released from prison. Her family expressed gratitude to the police force. Since Harold's death, they have never felt as though they have received justice or closure. In 1996, he passed away in Las Vegas at the age of 67. When he kidnapped Kelly Ann, he would have been 53 years old. The family released a statement saying, "We did not anticipate that our time with Kelly Ann would end abruptly, or that our future would change in every way imaginable when she left for school on September 20th, 1982. We had this adorable, mischievous 1-year-old girl for a bit. All that was left, all of a sudden, were the photos that would never fade, the calendar with the awful new holiday on it, the grave, and bits and pieces of Kelly's life kept in a box." Moving on to the next case. Pamela Shelley. Pamela Shelley was shot in the head in her bathroom at 5:15 p.m. on January 6, 2001. Her case was viewed as quite open-ended and was promptly determined to be a suicide. Pam was living with her boyfriend, Ronnie Hendrick, and her 2 kids, Kayla, 12, and Dustin, 9, at the time of her death. After moving 800 miles from her family and home in Arkansas, the mother of 2 was now residing on a rural farm in DeWitt County, Texas. She had consented to come to Texas with Ronnie in August 2000, and now she lived only a mile from his family. Pam was still breathing when Ronnie's father reported her attempted suicide. The ambulance was outside the region and needed to be directed to the closest hospital. Ronnie was more than willing to comply, departing with Pamela in the ambulance as soon as the local police arrived to look into the incident. He was therefore ineligible to be questioned or to have his gunshot residue tested. Despite everything, law enforcement continued their work and took pictures of the situation. The bathroom counter held the .32 caliber handgun that Pam had used, together with its holster and a solitary slug along with bloodstains on it. Investigators looked through the area and then at the Hendrick family, who were all there. Pam was suicidal, they informed the authorities, because she had to go back to Arkansas. And they said that her daughter wasn't happy in Texas, which is why she had to take this action. They also mentioned that the mother of 2 had a family history of suicide, and that her sister had committed suicide in the years before. They specifically pointed the finger at 12-year-old Kayla, saying that she was a challenging student. But none of this was true, as far as the investigating officers knew. When they questioned Ronnie, who claimed to have been outdoors when the bullets were fired, they were given further lies. He discovered his girlfriend on the floor when he ran inside. He told the same old narrative about how Pam was sad and angry that she had to leave Texas. He clarified that if she didn't go back to her native state, she would lose her kids. Meanwhile, in San Antonio, Pam passed away. Suicide was the immediate cause of death, as found by the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy. Her self-inflicted gunshot wound was compatible with the damage to her temple. But the police investigating the matter weren't quite happy with this decision, so they invited Ronnie Hendrick to come take a polygraph. He was supposed to arrive at 2, but he didn't show up either time. It didn't take long for police enforcement to understand that Ronnie had escaped, and they had difficulty finding him. The case eventually became cold and was closed until it was reopened in 2008 years later. Ronnie made a reappearance in DeWitt County at this time. Charges of domestic abuse have him incarcerated. It was discovered by an officer that he had moved to South Dakota following Pam's passing. When the time came for him to take a polygraph in connection with his ex-girlfriend's case, he failed. We must acknowledge, nevertheless, that polygraph examinations are infamously unreliable. However, this unfavorable outcome might have contributed to Ronnie's actions, since after more interrogation, he eventually told 4 witnesses that he wasn't outdoors when Pam killed herself. He had, in fact, been in the same room as her. In 2012, 4 years later, law enforcement collaborated with a new TV series called Cold Justice in an effort to raise awareness of the case. There were no fresh forensics discovered by the crew while they were researching the show, but there was a ton of additional stuff that was. First of all, there was no history of suicidal depression in Pam's family. Additionally, they discovered that Ronnie Hendrick had a history of alcoholism and domestic violence, and that he had already come dangerously close to killing a previous partner. But when Pam's ex-husband Jesse was located, the most illuminating detail was discovered. Being Kayla's biological father, he informed investigators that the day she passed away, Pam was scheduled to return home to Arkansas, and the couple planned to get back together and try to start a family again. He clarified that Ronnie took it from Pam when she was on the phone, telling Jesse that the only way his girlfriend would return to Arkansas was in a pine box. Why Jesse did not disclose this knowledge sooner is a mystery to us, though it's possible that due to his repeated run-ins with the law, which landed him in jail at the time of his police interview, he had grown wary of the authorities and didn't think it was wise to approach them. In 2012, Ronnie Hendrick, then 41, was charged with a crime. But there was one last problem with Pam's case solving. It proved exceedingly difficult for the authorities to assemble an impartial jury as Cold Justice became widely publicized before the trial was scheduled to begin, which ultimately resulted in a mistrial. But there was still hope. After that, Ronnie pled guilty and agreed to serve 22 years in prison. Moving on to the next case. Micah Wadley. In 1999, Micah Wadley, at 28 years old, resided in Richmond, California. Micah's neighbor heard screaming coming from her house in the 13100 block of Carlson Boulevard one evening in January. The neighbor knocked on her front door after going to her house. The screams went on for around 30 seconds. After that, the neighbor went back to his flat and dialed 911. The rear door was half open and unlocked, but the front door was locked when the officers arrived. Investigators entered the house and discovered Micah's dead on her bedroom floor. She had shoelaces fastening her hands together. It had smothered her. They found a buck knife under her body. At the crime scene, investigators discovered the suspect's DNA and fingerprints. Their first search was for a man she had gone out with the night before. In the end, that individual was not considered a suspect. The case fizzled out with no more leads for further investigation. A blood stain from the crime site and swabs taken from Micah's hands were used to create a mixed DNA profile in 2002. The Department of Justice received this DNA profile in order to search the criminal database. Regretfully, no matches were found. Then, more DNA testing was asked for in 2020. They concentrated on the leaks and previously untested fingernail clippings this time. Micah's fingernail clippings could be used to create a male DNA profile. In order to perform a familial search of the state DNA index system, the Contra Costa County Crime Lab submitted its DNA profile to the California Department of Justice DNA Data Bank Program in October 2020. The results of the requested family search were then delivered by agents from the California Department of Justice, Bureau of Forensic Services, and Bureau of Investigation in April 2021. A possible first-degree relative of the male suspect was discovered during the Department of Justice's inquiry. However, the relative was excluded from consideration as a suspect. Then, in September of 2021, police were able to locate an immediate relative with the help of the Contra Costa County District Attorney's Office. The subject provided a buccal swab, which was sent to the crime lab. The relative's buccal swab verified on September 17, 2021, that Jerry Lee Henderson is the individual whose DNA matched Micah's fingernail clippings. This information was reported to Richmond police. Just 11 days after taking Micah's life, Henderson overdosed and died, according to investigators. However, Richmond police were hoping that her family would receive some sort of closure from the news. Attorney General Rob Bonda of California stated, "Law enforcement never gave up on this case over the course of more than 20 years. I sincerely hope that some peace will be restored to Mika Wadley's family through this resolution. Although nothing can ever bring a loved one back, we're dedicated to doing everything in our power to support the pursuit of justice by exposing the truth. It is my hope that this news brings much-needed closure to all those who knew and loved Mika Wadley," said Acting Richmond Police Chief Louis Torona. At the press conference, a few members of Mika's family also gave remarks. Though they might not arrive today, answers will eventually surface. According to Quila Wadley, Mika's sister, it will arrive. "My very favorite aunt. She was intelligent, charming, and beautiful." Devine Peterson, her niece, said that she loved to hang out and have fun. Henderson, according to Mika's family, was merely a buddy of a friend. No other relationships existed. Moving on to the next case. Jane Britton. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, on May 17, 1945, Jane Britton was born. She was the daughter of Radcliffe College's administrative vice president, J. Boyd Britton. Jane was a student at the Wellesley Elite School Dana Hall School. She acquired skills in painting, piano and organ playing, and horseback riding. Following her high school graduation, Jane enrolled in Radcliffe College. She received her Radcliffe diploma in 1967 and was accepted to Harvard. She resided at 6 University Road in an apartment. When Jane wasn't studying, she liked to paint animals. James Humphreys, a classmate, ended up being her lover. She also had social interactions with the Mitchells, Donald and Jill, who shared the flat next to her. Her regular classes resumed after the break on the evening of January 6, 1969, the first Monday of the new year. Jane and James went to a restaurant for dinner. They went ice skating after that. James dropped Jane off at her apartment soon after 11 p.m. after the two of them arrived there just after 10 p.m. After getting some sherry next door from Donald and Jill Mitchell, Jane returned to her flat after midnight. January 7th was a big day for Jane the following day. It was her general examination day. It marked the conclusion of her degree's classroom component. Given that Jane had demonstrated a great deal of attention to her academics, her classmates thought it strange that she did not attend. That morning, James gave her a few calls, but she didn't pick up. He proceeded to her residence following the checkup. He could enter because her door was not locked. Face down on Jane's bed, he discovered her body. She put her nightgown over her head. James walked next door and asked Jill Mitchell to have a closer look since he thought she was sick. When she did, she saw that Jane was dead and that her head was covered in blood. After receiving a call, the Cambridge police began gathering evidence. It was discovered that Jane had been abused. Jane's cause of death was determined by an autopsy to be blunt force trauma. Investigators concluded that robbery was not the motive because nothing valuable had been taken from the flat. That night, a child who resided in a different apartment in the building heard strange sounds coming from the forest escape. Jane's neighbor who saw the man rush away from the building after 1 a.m. described the man as being roughly 6 feet and 170 pounds. This information was provided to detectives. National media attention was drawn to the situation. Over the following few weeks, the New York Times published multiple pieces regarding a case. Following the preliminary inquiry, no further relevant material surfaced, and the case was closed. 2017 saw the advancement of DNA technology to the point where detectives could generate a DNA profile from DNA collected at the crime scene, which belonged to an unidentified male. It was added to the federal CODI system, also referred to as the Combined DNA Index System. Investigators followed this to Michael Sumter. Michael died in the year 2001. He had received 2 assault convictions over his lifetime. It was Michael's DNA, for sure. The DNA recovered from a crime scene had to be compared to that of another male who was closely associated by investigators. Investigators used Ancestry.com to find Michael's brother. He gave them a sample of his DNA. Michael's sibling and 99.92% of all male humans could be ruled out as suspects following additional DNA testing. This demonstrated beyond a doubt that Michael killed Jane. At the time of the incident, he did not reside in the Cambridge region. Nonetheless, he lived and worked in the neighborhood for 2 years before to the incident. In Cambridge, Michael also had a girlfriend. This led detectives to conclude that he encountered Jane while in the vicinity. Stephen Weltick. On June 13, 1952, Stephen Weltick was born in St. Louis, Missouri. He spent his entire life there. Stephen, being 40 years old, was employed at Ajax Liquor on April 23, 1993. The booze store on Jeffco Boulevard in Arnold belonged to him. A guy and a lady went to the store that morning to make some purchases. They contacted the police after discovering Stephen Weltick's body face down. His own gun, used in an execution-style manner, took his life. Since nothing was taken from the store, burglary didn't seem to be the reason. After questioning Stephen's friends and family, investigators were unable to gather any pertinent information. Additionally, no witnesses reported seeing anything unusual. Sadly, the case remained unsolved for a very long time because there were no leads, despite the detectives' best efforts. Then, in 2015, a woman came forward with the allegation that Stephen's life was taken by her husband, Laurel Harp. That year, Laurel's associate also came forward to inform the authorities that Laurel Harp was, in fact, the culprit. They have sufficient proof to establish that Stephen Weltick was murdered by Laurel Harp. To arrest him, they traveled to the Riverview Care Center assisted living facility in St. Louis. Laurel admitted right away, but he said that when the gun went off, the two of them were fighting. That is untrue, though, as investigators found that Stephen was kneeling when he was shot. Investigators were also informed by Laurel that he intended to rough up Stephen when he got to the booze store. Laurel was frequently hired by others to enforce or collect. He frequently used violence to get people to pay him money they owed. Laurel has completed her prison sentence for stealing, burglary, and illegal use of a weapon. He would be sentenced to life in jail without the chance of probation or parole if found guilty now. Sadly, Stephen's mother died earlier this year without discovering the identity of the person who killed her son at Faithful Day 27 years ago. Moving on to the next case. Somerton Man. Some believe he was searching for a past love. Some people believe he was a smuggler. He was allegedly a Cold War spy. 60 years later, a professor of electronic engineering fell in love with a girl as well as this enigma. A girl who was the key to what used to appear to be an intractable enigma. Finally, after 70 years, we solved the puzzle. This is the Somerton Man's tale. A couple is taking a leisurely stroll along Somerton Park Beach, which is located just outside of Adelaide, South Australia, on November 30th, 1948, at approximately 7:15 p.m. As the waves gently lap against the barrier, they notice a man dressed sharply in a brown suit leaning against it. He appears to be sleeping. Even when he waves half-heartedly at them, the pair only laughs, assuming he's had too much to drink. The same man is lying there on the sand, still as a statue, and is noticed by two jockeys who are exercising their horses on the beach the following morning. That is odd right now, correct? One of the jockeys, Neil Day, then approaches to have a better look. He tries to nuzzle the man, but nothing happens. And there was the start of the Somerton Man's mystery. That was December 19th, 1948, right there on the bright shores of Adelaide. The body was sent to the Royal Adelaide Hospital for examination by the responding authorities. The attending physician guessed that the man had probably died about 2 in the morning. He seemed like your typical Joe at first glance, a 5'11" man in his mid-40s with gray eyes and reddish-brown hair. He had a clean-shaven face, neat fingernails, soft hands, and a polished appearance. But one of the medical examiners noticed a few anomalies when they looked more closely. First of all, the man's calf muscles were remarkably prominent. Another oddity was that he was missing an astounding 16 teeth. They searched the man's pockets in the hopes of finding some information about who he was, but they found nothing. No ID, no wallet. The only items they discovered were 2 combs, a pack of chewing gum, a carton of cigarettes and matches, and a few airline tickets. A counterfoil from an unused bus ticket from Adelaide to the adjacent town of Henley Beach, and another from Adelaide to Somerton. However, what really complicated the mystery was the man's attire. Back ago, it was typical for people to put their names or initials on the labels of their clothing so that they could be washed later. However, every label on the man's outfit had been carefully cut off. They even took off the name badges from the undervest. And there was even another oddity. A rip in his pants pocket had been expertly repaired with vivid orange embroidery floss. Unsettling results from the autopsy included an enlarged spleen and damage to the liver. Despite the pathologist's suspicions of heart failure, the man's heart strangely seemed to be functioning normally. Test results for toxicology were negative. There was no poison in his system, not a hint of violence either. There were no scratches on his body or alterations to the sand surrounding him. The coroner became perplexed. The Somerton man's death was not natural, whatever caused it to happen. There was definitely no accident. The Somerton man's identity had to be investigated before the authorities could even start to piece together who might have been responsible for his death. His picture appeared in Australian newspapers with a silent call for someone to come forward and identify themselves as his family. The mystery drew large audiences who rushed to the mortuary in hopes of seeing his face. People kept coming out of the shadows, claiming to know the Somerton man, but every lead ended in oblivion. Then something unexpected happened. A publication boldly claimed that E.C. Johnson was the man discovered on Somerton Beach. However, E.C. Johnson personally corrected the record when he walked into the police station. The Somerton man provided his fingerprints, but regrettably none of them matched. The cops, unfazed, distributed his picture widely. Numerous phone calls arrived, all claiming to know the enigmatic individual. He was a husband gone from the family, a guardian away from illegal card games, a recognizable face from the military testing base up north. A local newspaper even made the joke that the police provided an almost round-the-clock taxi service to transport individuals who were anxious to see the mysterious figure to and from the mortuary. However, hopes gradually faded as they increased. Those who were positive they knew him were convinced otherwise when they saw him in person, and thus he stayed the Somerton man, an enigma that seemed to grow bigger every day. Investigators would struggle to piece together his identity and the circumstances of his death for years, if not decades. There was conjecture. He was a former dancer, a Cold War spy, and the casualty of a bad love. It turned into one of the most intriguing and long-lasting cold cases in Australia, a story that would enthrall future generations. A month or so after discovering his dead, detectives turned their attention to the scant belongings of the Somerton man. He did, after all, have those travel tickets and a few trinkets, but no real luggage. In order to find lost bags, the police spread out their net and posted notices at motels and train stations. They searched all possible places a bag may end up abandoned, including dry cleaners, bus stops, and lost property offices. Then, as if by magic, 3 days after the call was made, on January 14, 1949, they struck gold. They noticed a dark brown bag that had been abandoned at the Adelaide train station. The luggage tag indicated that it had been checked in on November 30th, the day the Somerton man was found on the beach, at approximately 11 a.m. When detectives pried it open, they discovered an odd assortment of objects, including handkerchiefs, scissors, a knife, and shaving supplies. However, it was a simple spool of thread that caused their thoughts to race. An unidentified brand that is unavailable in Australia, in the exact same shade of orange as the thread that was used to repair the Somerton man's pocket. Just a coincidence? Not likely. Hold on, there's more. There was a stencil brush among the miscellaneous items. A third officer in the Navy would normally use this kind of instrument. Strangely enough, though, they also found drafting pencils, the kind used by engineers, next to this nautical clue. And then there were the garments, shirts, trousers, a coat, and more, all in the Somerton man's exact size and style, with the exception of 3 that had had their labels painstakingly taken off. One tie among them has a fading ink name scribbled on the label. It appeared to be Keen. At last, a ray of optimism. The Somerton man might have had a name, and the police had a possible lead. Many English-speaking countries, including the US, where the man's code originated, had their records searched through. But, despite their best attempts, they were unable to locate any information about a missing person with that name. Investigators appeared to be stumbling over thin air, trying to figure out who this man was, as it seemed he was desperate to remain anonymous. But it was time for the Somerton man to rest. More than 6 months had gone since his passing, but not before detectives saved his face, the only concrete indication they had. They paid their final respects to a guy whose identity remained a mystery by having him embalmed and creating a plaster cast of his head and shoulders. The Somerton man was buried in an Adelaide cemetery on June 14, 1949. His identity was hidden under a concrete vault and remained a mystery. "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach," was the plain statement engraved on the tombstone. Authorities were no closer to solving the mystery that surrounded him despite the burial. By April of 1949, the police had reached a dead end. It had been over 5 months since the body was found, and they were still no closer to solving the mystery. They resorted to University of Adelaide pathology expert Professor John Cleland, frustrated and in need of a breakthrough, to re-examine the facts. The way that Professor Cleland went about things was just brilliant. He came up with a cunning plan after realizing how difficult it would be to tell whether the garments in the bag would fit the Somerton man's lifeless figure. He got someone who was around the same size as the Somerton man to try on the clothes from the bag, and the ones the man was found wearing. They fit like a glove miraculously, proving beyond a doubt that the suitcase really belonged to him. That wasn't all, though. Professor Cleland discovered a secret pocket in the Somerton man's trousers when examining his clothing. There was a rolled-up piece of paper with 2 big Persian words printed on it. The professor did not find these words very memorable. This was a really confusing statement, and no one at the station knew what it meant. Then a well-read newspaper reporter clarified that it was inspired by a work written by the well-known poet Omar Khayyam from the 12th century. They were specifically taken from his book Rubaiyat. Tamamshud is a word that signifies end. With this new information, investigators surmised that the Somerton man may have left this cryptic clue to indicate that he committed suicide or to reflect on the greater meanings of life in his final moments. It's interesting to note that the Rubaiyat was highly valued at the time. The first edition of the Rubaiyat was rebound in 1909 by 2 expert English bookbinders who embellished it with more than 1,000 precious and semi-precious stones, such as ivory, silver, and gold leaf. This magnificent extension cost an American buyer about $70,000 in today's currency. Regretfully, the book in question perished on the Titanic while traveling to America and hasn't been found again. However, the investigators weren't after that particular book. The book from which the scroll was torn was what they desired. They made contact with all the libraries in the Adelaide region, asking the staff for assistance in going through their copies of the Rubaiyat to check for any missing pages. Until a fortunate break came along. It seemed impossible to locate the particular book if the scrap was from a unique printing. About the time the Somerton man met his end, on July 24, 1949, a chemist entered the Adelaide police station with a copy of the Rubaiyat he had found in his car months before. After reading the enigmatic scrap in the newspapers, he stopped discounting it and started to be curious. He turned to the last page and showed the words Tamamshud that were missing. The piece from the Somerton man's pocket and the tear in the book matched exactly, giving officials the much-needed breakthrough. Examining the book more closely revealed another interesting lead. A phone number on the back cover that was written in pencil. The number belonged to a young nurse who lived not far from Somerton Beach, a mere stroll away from the scene of the man's discovery. And so Jessica Thompson started to draw attention. Jessica's response to the police's questioning was just as enigmatic as the case itself. She said she had nothing to do with the Somerton man. There were virtually no leads left, and the investigators were at a loss. Then they made the decision to invite her in to have a closer look at the Somerton man's cast. The sight of the plaster cast of the Somerton man's face appeared to shake her visibly. She shifted back and forth between astonished silence and evasive answers. The chief inspector saw that she was about to pass out and reached out to support her, but then realized she was able to stand by herself. However, the investigators' will to uncover the layers of mystery surrounding her was only strengthened by her evasiveness. Investigators were greatly burdened by the riddle of Jessica Thompson's phone number in the Somerton man's rebellion. When pressed for clarification, Jessica at last opened up. She met Alfred Boxall, an Australian Army officer, when she was employed at a Sydney hospital during World War II. She admitted to giving him a copy of the rebellion, but she remained evasive about their romantic relationship. When the police discovered that Boxall was still alive and still in possession of the ruby Aunt Jessica had given him, they mistakenly believed they had made progress. However, this book was not the Somerton man's edition. It had a handwritten poem and Jessica's signature on it. Going back to the enigmatic pencil notation, the investigators found more information than just phone digits. Beneath them was a string of barely readable characters. When exposed to ultraviolet light, the message was more visible. 5 rows of capital letters, some crossed out, arranged as though at random. They realized it. It was a code. Australia's naval intelligence, famous for interpreting messages during warfare, received the rebellion. Police also published the cryptic letter in newspapers in an attempt to reach out to the public in the hopes of making progress. Even the naval intelligence professionals, however, were unable to decipher the code. Everyone was confused by the code, which led to hypotheses ranging from a ship's name to a depressing message. Even with concerted efforts, a definitive explanation remained elusive. 5 years later, in 1958, police formally concluded their inquiry into the death of the Somerton man. However, conspiracy rumors persisted due to the attraction of an unexplained death and an enigmatic code. The Somerton case, like many unsolved mysteries, captivated the minds of those who ventured to ponder its secrets with a trail of unanswered questions and infinite speculation. Australia became heavily involved in espionage during the 1940s, having been a vital component of the British Commonwealth and the Allied troops in World War II. Intelligence services were instrumental in bringing the war to a close by intercepting communications from adversarial countries. The post-war world became more divided along ideological lines between capitalism and communism, which fueled a race for military technological dominance. There were hints in the case file about the Somerton man that suggested he was not your typical citizen. He carefully hid his identity, leaving all the clothes in the luggage and on him unlabeled. There were very few products using the name Keane, which was eventually unsuccessful. His nationality was still a mystery. His coat's origin led some to surmise that he was British, although his facial characteristics and hairdo suggested otherwise. However, the fact that his coat was made in America did not automatically label him as a spy. Before his unexplained death, it's possible that the Somerton man had traveled to the United States on vacation or family business. However, that was not the sole indicator suggesting an alien persona. Not to mention the strange orange thread, a brand unavailable in Australia, that he used to fix his trousers. This implied a great deal of travel, portraying the Somerton man as a global mystic. And then the query came up. Adelaide is a small city on Australia's southern coast. What was he doing there? The Woomera Air Force Complex, some 300 kilometers to the north, may hold the key. The largest land-based test range in the Western Hemisphere was located at Woomera, a joint Australian-British station. When it was founded in 1947, it spanned an area nearly the size of Pennsylvania, 47,000 square miles of level, arid land. Tests of atomic bombs, missiles, and rockets were among the highly classified military programs carried out by Britain at this station. If this theory is correct, there would have been a lot of espionage activities in South Australia. The Somerton man might have been an Australian spy with too much information. It's possible that he turned Soviet and needed to be silenced. Alternatively, he might have been a Soviet agent who was about to defect but was killed off before he could do so. This returns us to the enigmatic circumstances surrounding his demise. Medical professionals conducting the inquiry discovered no poison in the man's system, at least not that could be determined using standard methods. One theory was that he swallowed something, or received something that disintegrated right away and left no trace. Although there were no visible indications of puncture wounds, another explanation proposed injection. His liver's state did not lend credence to this theory. Sir Cedric Stanton Hicks, an Adelaide University physiology and pharmacology professor, was approached by the coroner in search of explanations. Hicks wrote down on a sheet of paper for the coroner the names of those who might have been poisoned. Among them was strophenthine, a strong chemical that certain West African tribes had traditionally employed to make poison arrows. It was deadly and imperceptible to traditional chemical tests, even at low dosages. Kate, the daughter of Jessica Thompson, revealed in 2013 that her mother was fluent in Russian, a fact Jessica had never before divulged to anyone. Jessica also admitted to Kate that she had lied to the police about who the Somerton man was. Jessica alluded to the fact that the situation went beyond the police's purview, implying higher-level participation. This information raised rumors that Jessica may have been working for the Australian government as a counter-espionage agent. It's possible that she was providing military officials with intelligence, of which the Rubaiyats were an essential component. Still, if not even the most skilled codebreakers could crack the code, then who held the secret? In 1995, Derek Abbott read about the Somerton man story in a magazine article. Though he was intrigued at first, he was unable to delve more into the enigma due to his duties as an Adelaide University electrical engineering professor. Derek didn't become interested in the topic again until he read about the unsolved code that was discovered in the man's possession in 2007. Experts in code breaking spent 6 years delving into the mystery, yet the solution remained elusive. Unfazed, Derek turned his attention to solving another mystery: who Jessica was. The mysterious nurse's real name was removed from official documents to keep her private and her identity a mystery for many years. Jerry Feltus, an Adelaide investigator, helped Derek out by providing the original piece of paper with Jessica's phone number that was in the Somerton man's book. Derek discovered Jessica Thompson, better known as Jo, was Jessica's real identity after conducting a thorough research. Regretfully, Derek was unable to ask Jessica about her relationship with the Somerton man before she passed away. Investigating Jessica's past, Derek learned that she had been romantically engaged with Prosper Thompson, a local, in 1947, a year and a half before the latter man passed away. Together, the two had a son named Robert. Though Jessica insisted that Prosper was Robin's father, questions about who her child's father was, especially since she was so evasive when questioned by the police, raised. This gave Derek the idea for a novel theory. The man from Somerton was Robin's paternal grandfather. After looking into it more, Derek found strong evidence to back up his theory. Like the Somerton man, Robin had unusual physical characteristics, such as unusual ear structures and hypodontia, a hereditary disease. In addition, both had experience with ballet. Robin had even done shows with the Australian Ballet Company. These results pointed to a possible family relationship between the Somerton guy and Robin. The finding that Rachel Egan, Robin's daughter, might be the Somerton man's granddaughter added credence to it. Nothing short of extraordinary was Rachel's investigation into her family's history, which was entwined with one of Australia's biggest mysteries. She discovered mysteries that linked her to the unidentified guy discovered on Somerton Beach as she dug further into her family history. Rachel was dubious at first, but she consented to see Derek Abbott. Their mutual curiosity and perseverance sparked an unanticipated friendship that finally developed into a love tale that transcended even the most enduring enigmas. After getting hitched in 2010, Derek and Rachel are parents to 3 kids. Exhuming the Somerton man's remains in order to obtain DNA was the most logical course of action. Derek asked to have the remains exhumed multiple times, but each time he was told no. But in 2015, Derek discovered an alternative. He found that the 1940s plaster cast still had part of the Somerton man's hair stuck in it. These hairs were delivered by Derek to a University of Adelaide lab. He believed there would be enough DNA to compare it to Rachel's, but the test yielded conflicting results, and the little sample size prevented scientists from sequencing the entire molecule. Derek's optimism was rekindled in 2021, though, when the Australian government eventually dug out the Somerton man. A group carrying large gear pulled up at Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery on May 18, 2021. The Somerton man had to be pulled from the ground for about 12 hours. Most of his organic matter had degraded from being dead for more than 70 years, and he had also been embalmed. Preservatives are used in place of the body's natural fluids in this situation. The preservation method damaged the DNA, even if it helped to keep the body in good health. There was a chance that not enough viable DNA would remain to collect a sample. Derek and Colleen Fitzpatrick worked together in 2022, painstakingly tracking the genetic traces of the Somerton man, the hair on the plaster cast. One name stuck out when they put together his family tree. The name on the mystery clothing matched that of a man who suited the description of the Somerton man, and who had a brother-in-law named Thomas Keane. Derek and Colleen tracked down the Somerton man's relatives and nephews. On July 22, 2022, scientists discovered two matches using DNA samples they had collected from their living descendants. Christy Webb is Somerton man's granddaughter, and Stuart Webb is his great-great-nephew. The investigative community was rocked by the revelation. It inspired fresh optimism that the Somerton man's identity was about to be revealed. Carl Charles Webb was an Australian electrical engineer born in Melbourne in November of 1905. It became clear as Webb's life narrative came to light that it was anything but typical. He had 6 siblings and was raised in a big household. According to articles in the newspaper at the time, he played community football. This could explain his general physique and well-developed calves. Charles had suffered significant losses in his life before to his passing. Along with his brother Roy, with whom he was close, his mother and father also departed from this life. Charles also experienced a divorce with Dorothy Robertson, the woman he wed in the vicinity of 1941. Dorothy's later divorce decree described their tumultuous marriage. Charles loved to write poetry, with the theme of death appearing frequently. Dorothy once discovered him in bed covered in ether. She spared his life even though he took 50 sleeping tablets. Charles's story reveals a tale of domestic tragedy rather than spy intrigue, despite rampant speculation to the contrary. Webb disappeared without a trace in April 1947, leaving a broken family and a trail of mystery in his wake. The South Australia Police Department carried out additional tests to confirm Webb's identity, even though DNA evidence clearly suggested that he was who he claimed to be. The absence of formal confirmation, however, allowed for conjecture and maintained the door open to the conspiracy theories that had long surrounded the case. In his own journey, Derek Abbott achieved closure despite the unanswered questions. Any relationship between his wife, Rachel, and the Somerton guy was ruled out by DNA testing. His years-long personal burden was lightened by this. The Webb family experienced a range of feelings in response to the discovery, including relief, closure, and a sense of regaining a lost chapter in their past. Charles Webb's great-great-nephew and granddaughter, Christy Webb, and Stuart dug through old family photos. They rediscovered long-forgotten pictures of Charles. The entire Webb family was present at a large family get-together back then. Essentially, this picture was taken 20 years before he passed away. Charles Webb changed during their trip from being a strange man in the news to a beloved family member. His life narrative served as a monument to the continuing strength of family ties and resonated far beyond the parameters of a cold case. The Somerton man case has been resolved to a great extent. His name is now known, but regrettably, a lot of answers perished with him. We may never learn the circumstances behind his death. The Cowden family, together with their 5-year-old son David James and their 5-month-old daughter Melissa Dawn, Richard Cowden and his wife Belinda June shared a home. They lived in a modest, comfortable home in White City, Oregon. The family went camping at the Rogue River National Forest Campground in the isolated Siskiyou Mountains of Oregon, close to the California border, over Labor Day weekend in 1974. Their plan was to camp until Sunday, September 1st, when they would have dinner at Belinda's mother's place before returning home. The campground was roughly a mile distant from Belinda's mother's residence. Richard and David were spotted purchasing some milk at a local store in the neighboring town of Copper, Oregon, on Sunday morning at around 9 in the morning. None of the Cowden family members would ever be seen alive again after that. Belinda's mother grew anxious after spending hours waiting for her daughter and her family. Then, to find out why it was taking them so long, she made the decision to drive out to the campsite. Upon her arrival, she discovered a picnic table with a quart of milk, Melissa's nappies, and Belinda's pocketbook spread out, and her family's car positioned exactly where it should have been. Overall, the campsite appeared completely unaltered, giving the impression that the family would be returning soon. She found Richard's pricey wristwatch and his wallet, which had $23, lying on the ground beside the creek as she strolled around the campsite. She waited for the family to return for approximately an hour, but they never did. After a while, she called the police. Fishing poles leaned against trees and carefully arranged, abandoned kitchen items on tree stumps were discovered by police. There was no indication that anything had been searched through or gone missing, and the car appeared undisturbed. The entire situation was unnaturally quiet, with no signs of foul play or struggle. The family's swimwear were strangely missing, as though they had all gone for a leisurely swim. Even though the wallet and pocketbook contained cash and credit cards, these were the only items that were discovered to be missing from the camp. 5 miles or so from the camp, the family dog was discovered unhurt. Despite a thorough search being conducted, the missing family was not found. At the time, many speculations were proposed as to what might have happened to them. One was that the bodies might have drowned while swimming, but there was no sign of them anywhere along the little creek. There was also the possibility that they had vanished voluntarily, but the family appeared to be content and well-adjusted, and there had been no significant deaths or enemies. Furthermore, since everything was left at the campsite, robbery could not have been the motivation. 7 months passed with no word on why they vanished. Then, in a distant forested location in April 1975, 2 hunters discovered what appeared to be human remains. When police arrived on the scene, they found the rotting bodies of 2 adults and 2 children. It was established that the remains belonged to the Cowden family. The bodies of Melissa and David Cowden were discovered crammed into a cave on a precipitous mountainside around 7 miles from their campsite. The cave had been sealed off with boulders to conceal the macabre sight inside. The cave was located just a short distance from an area that had been thoroughly examined by authorities when the people went missing. It was discovered that Belinda and David had been shot with a .22 caliber bullet, and Melissa, the young child, had suffered significant blunt head damage. Richard's body was discovered a few feet outside the cave, not within where his family had been located. Although it is believed that he was shot to death, his body was too deteriorated to determine the cause of death. Initially, it was thought that Richard Cowden had killed his family before killing himself, but a thorough search of the area produced no weapons of any kind. There would still have been a weapon if Richard had been the one to kill his family members and commit suicide. Then, rumors circulated that they had encountered some kind of foul play. One of the theories offered by the police was that they had gone swimming in the stream, been kidnapped at gunpoint, driven a short distance, pushed up the slope, and then executed by shooting. However, nobody knows for certain who or why they did it. Cowden's father was cleared later on, but suspicion was raised because he had committed suicide not long after the disappearances. Subsequently, it was believed that the murderer was a convicted rapist and murderer by the name of Dwayne Lee Little, who was out on parole in 1974 after doing time for the 1964 attack and death of a teenager. Before they vanished, it was discovered that he had been purchasing gas in the neighborhood of the Cowden campground, but there was never enough proof to establish Little's involvement in the crime. In the 1980s, Little would be apprehended and found guilty of the unrelated murder and rape of a woman. Even still, No one has been detained or accused in connection with the Cowden family massacre as of yet. Moving on to the next case. William Kennedy Smith. Patricia Bowman, a 29-year-old mother of one, was having a drink in a pub in Palm Beach, Florida on March 29, 1991, with a friend. She met 30-year-old William Kennedy Smith, and she had no idea that her life would be completely flipped upside down in a matter of hours. Smith was a Kennedy family relative and a Georgetown University medical student. He was, in particular, the nephew of the late President John F. Kennedy. That evening, Smith was drinking in the bar with Senator Ted Kennedy and his cousin Patrick. Smith asked Patricia for a ride back to the adjacent home his family owned after they first met. Patricia accepted, and the two of them started strolling along the beach. Smith inquired as to whether the 29-year-old would want to go swimming. Patricia remembered that she had felt safe up until that moment, but she was reluctant to enter the water. It would be freezing, and she couldn't swim. She also didn't want to undress in his presence, but Smith appeared to have no problem taking off his clothes in front of her. In a 1992 Vanity Fair interview, Patricia stated, "I turned my back because I didn't necessarily want to see him in his boxer shorts. I suddenly realized that it was getting late. He's heading for the pool. I ought to leave. As I made my way towards the stairs, someone grabbed my leg. I had a hard time escaping him. To the reasonable mind, that ought to be a warning. Avoid doing this. This man has suddenly grasped my leg, and he was a nice man. I'm on top of him. My body hurts from him." Patricia stated in her deposition that she had kissed Smith once that night, but that she had never once agreed to have sex. The 29-year-old contacted two of her friends to come pick her up after the claimed rape at around 4 in the morning. She was brought to their house and then dropped off at her own address when she made a call to a rape crisis center. A few hours later, Patricia went to the hospital for a rape kit examination, where doctors found sperm inside her, along with some bruises, and she complained of excruciating agony. She also reported the incident to the police. It took 9 months for Smith's trial to start. Assistant State Attorney Moira Latch of Palm Beach County led the prosecution and has an almost perfect conviction record. Despite being well known for her professional abilities, the 40-year-old's icy manner was observed to make her seem unlikable. Roy Black, also referred to as the Professor, was Smith's defense lawyer. He was notorious for taking on cases involving drug dealers and murders. About a dozen expert witnesses were called in to cast doubt on Patricia's 29-year-old account, and 5 private investigators were hired to dig into her background and the histories of her 2 friends who had picked her up from the Kennedy residence the night of the alleged assault. Notably, Moira Latch sought to remove Judge Mary Lupo from the bench before to the trial, claiming that she was biased in favor of the defense. She came to this conclusion because Lash and her co-counsel frequently saw the judge frowning, glaring, and scowling at them. The journalist who attended the trial noted that Lash and Lupo clearly did not get along after the request was refused. In his Vanity Fair piece, Dominic June noted that Lash should have tried to get Lupo removed from the case because her co-counsel's husband was in a court dispute with the judge's spouse over money. Another apparent gaffe in the prosecution's strategy involved the unfavorable testimony of Patricia's friend and Mercer, who had picked her up the night of the alleged assault. Despite being one of the prosecution's most important witnesses, she was viewed as haughty and conceited, and it soon became apparent that she had accepted payment in exchange for appearing on TV. One of these was broadcast on the day the trial started. This meant that Smith's defense team could discredit her and paint her as a person who is driven solely by greed. Roy Black, Smith's lawyer, was also charged with selectively admitting jurors who supported the Kennedy family and excluding others who voiced criticism of them. When called as a witness, Senator Ted Kennedy spoke for a long time about the catastrophes that befell the family, appearing distraught even though most of what he said had nothing to do with the case. Smith allegedly shouted into the microphone, "I think this process has been unfair to him. as his uncle got off the stand. "It's not with bitterness that I say that. All I really mean is that." In an attempt to undermine Patricia, Black also asserted that she had a history of substance misuse and had had multiple abortions. In addition, he mentioned that she had an unmarried daughter. In court, Smith maintained that Patricia had given her consent for their encounter and that she had become enraged when he mispronounces her name as Kathy. Patricia refuted this. During this period, 3 more women came forward and agreed to testify that Smith had abused them between 1983 and 1988. They were a doctor, a medical student, and a law student in that order. The latter was Matthew Kennedy's cousin Smith's girlfriend. Judge Lupo, however, rejected the testimony without making any remarks. After 77 minutes of deliberation, the jury, comprised of 6 members, found Smith not guilty of any of the counts. He later graduated from medical school and became a specialist in treating landmine victims. For the most part, he avoided the spotlight. Notably, in 1995, one of the jurors was married to his defense attorney, Roy Black. A legal action was brought against Smith in 2004 by a former Center of International Rehabilitation employee who had been his assistant and claimed that he had sexually assaulted her in 1999. He dismissed the claims as baseless and refuted them. A representative for the CIR said that 2 distinct federal sexual harassment charges against Smith had been brought by former workers and had, quote, been settled amicably. The case was dismissed in January of 2005. Moving on to the next case. Nellie Hicks. The 59-year-old mother of 6 children was Nellie Hicks. She worked as a 4th grade teacher at San Lorenzo, California's Ashland School. Nellie was at home in Newark, California, on May 10, 1972. She shared a home with her lifelong buddy as well as her grown son and his spouse. About 1 in the morning that fateful morning, Nellie and her friend, who was also a teacher, had a brief conversation. She was asleep on a sofa in the living room. She was last observed alive at that point. Nellie's son found her dead body in the same room around 4 hours later. There was no sign of her wallet. Later on, it was discovered a few blocks away, close to some pants that had blood on it. As the murders took place, the other residents were all fast sleeping. This made the police believe that the intruder had first rendered her unconscious before attacking her. Police discovered that she had been beaten and battered with a brick wrapped in pantyhose after noticing that she was only partially clothed. The power of the strikes ripped her head open, revealing the horror right away. The culprit slashed her dress and bra with manicure scissors after breaking through an unsecured sliding glass door. Everyone who knew Nellie could not have imagined that someone would have a reason to end her life because she was a well-liked and respected instructor. He and the other men she dated were questioned 10 years prior to her leaving an abusive husband, but this did not result in the identification of a potential suspect. Although fingerprints were found, they were never connected to a particular individual. DNA was taken during the autopsy. Nevertheless, despite decades of investigation, the case was never solved since DNA testing was not available at the time. There would soon be another horrific crime committed nearby. Teresa Pica, a 48-year-old resident of Hayward, California, lived on Edlow Drive. One of Teresa's twin 10-year-old children found her face down and hunched over the couch on May 15, 1979. Her 3 kids had last seen her alive the previous evening. She had taken off her nightgown, revealing her legs. A rope was fastened behind her back to restrain her hands. Beside her lay a blood-stained rock and a shirt that had been used to choke her. A window in the front room had been forced open. The neighbor who heard rustling close to the house in the middle of the night provided the lone eyewitness story of an intruder. Teresa had lost her handbag. Later on, her wallet and other belongings were found in a trash can down the street and in the yard of a neighbor. Similar to Nellie's case, DNA was gathered, but testing equipment was non-existent. In the decades that followed, several people were looked into, but no suspects came to light. In 2 remarkably identical situations, family members uncovered the remains of their loved ones after they had been beaten and raped when they got up in the morning. They had been sleeping in their living rooms when a stealthy invader had crept into their houses and attacked them. The culprit, Fred Bernard Farnham, was identified in 2023 by detectives from the Hayward and Newark police departments. The killings of Teresa Pica in Hayward in 1979 and Nellie and Hicks in Newark in 1972 were both committed by Farnham, according to statements made by the police in Hayward and Newark in December 2023. Unfortunately, Farnham died in a hospital in Oregon in 2007 at the age of 73. After growing up in California's Central Valley, he relocated to the South Bay in the 1950s. He was found guilty there of several attacks committed in the 1970s. Nothing suggests he ever called the East Bay home. He also resided in Oregon, where he passed away in the town of Cape Junction, as well as Nevada, Idaho, North Dakota, Alaska, and Oregon. In 2021, the exhumation of the remains of a suspected suspect was carried out using the same procedure that was used to find Farnham. By comparing its DNA to the evidence from the crime site, it was later ruled out. However, according to the police, that man was on the same genealogical tree. 9-year-old David Hicks, one of Nellie's 3 surviving children, expressed gratitude to the authorities for their persistent efforts to bring the 52-year-old cold case to a conclusion. 3 months before the police cracked Nellie's cold case, her son Ron, who had discovered her body, had died. David referred to his mother as a hero for raising a family of 6 while holding a full-time teaching position. I am so appreciative of the police officers and their commitment to this issue. They all put up a great deal of effort to provide our family with closure. Similar to how Teresa's daughters expressed relief at the closure brought about by Farnham's identification, their statement was read aloud during the press conference. The statement says that our mother can now sleep in peace. We now acknowledge that the person responsible for this will never face consequences. However, we give thanks to God for your perseverance and effort. We can now go on and put this difficult period of our life behind us. While learning the suspect's identity after all these years was a positive development, Jan Whalen, 62, Teresa's daughter, told the San Francisco Chronicle that it also set off everything all over again. I blamed myself for not being able to halt what happened for the majority of my life. It still stings even though I was eventually able to tell myself a few years ago that there was nothing I could do. This will now enable me to find closure. Following Teresa's murder, Newark and Hayward police connected the crimes due to a recognizable behavioral pattern that the 2 instances shared, according to Newark Police Captain Jolene Macias. That one instance will solve the other was fueled by this assumption. She also made it a point to echo the feelings expressed by the victim survivors, stating that today is really about these families and how resilient they have been over the past 50 years. 45 years is a long time, Hayward Police Chief Brian Matthews stated during the press conference. For several generations of investigators, it has been a long time. Authorities believe Farnham may have been involved. Authorities believe Farnham may have been connected to other incidents as well, and they have notified law enforcement to investigate their other unsolved cases for potential links. Pamela Shelley. In January of 2001, a horrible phone call was placed to 911 operators. The caller had called to let them know that Pamela Shelley, a young mother, had shot and killed herself. The forensic pathologist concluded that Pamela Shelley committed suicide after the autopsy, but the police and Pamela's family didn't think the results were real. After years of doubting Pamela's apparent death, the case fell cold, but one determined detective made it her mission to follow up on it. The case was revisited with a little help from a TV show about genuine crimes. The small Texas hamlet of Cuero, where today's case is set, was rocked by Pamela Shelley's passing. On July 25, 1969, Pamela Jean Shelley was born in Houston, Texas. However, Ashdown, Arkansas, where she was raised, was a small town with 4,500 residents. Pamela is from a hardworking family. Her father drove a truck for a living, and her mother worked at a nursing home. She has a sister and a brother as well. It was said about Pamela Shelley that she was incredibly gregarious and nice to everyone in her vicinity. Pamela Shelley first met her first husband, 20-year-old Jesse Suggs, when she was 16 years old. They talked about their aspirations to get married in the future. But Pamela's dad insisted that she finish high school before doing anything else. So, as soon as she graduated from high school, she got married to Jesse. They soon became parents, welcoming their first daughter, Kayla, into the world. After only 4 years of marriage, Pamela and Jesse started having issues. Jesse used drugs to get high on a regular basis, and ultimately, he turned to criminality as a result of his drug abuse. Before Pamela and Jesse eventually got divorced, they had an intermittent relationship for a while. Pamela Shelley married a different man named Gary in the summer of 1991. They became parents to a child they called Dustin. After a year of marriage, she briefly moved back in with her ex-husband Jesse before settling in with her parents. A few years later, Pamela Shelley got back in touch with her childhood friend Ronnie Hendricks. They had not communicated in over 10 years, but she and Ronnie always seemed to click. Following their renewed romance, Pamela accepted Ronnie's invitation to move in with him and the kids in Cuero, Texas, when he proposed. She and her son Dustin, along with Ronnie, took an 8-hour care ride to Cuero in the summer of 2000. The daughter of Pamela, Kayla, was scheduled to arrive a few months later. Ronnie Hendricks lived in Cuero, Texas, with his family. Everything was good between them, according to Deborah, Ronnie's mother, until Kayla moved in. She claimed that because her son Ronnie would always push her to help around the house, Kayla changed the entire dynamic in the home and caused them to argue regularly. Kayla also insisted on going back to Arkansas with her mother and herself so she could be with her father, according to Deborah and Ronnie. Ronnie and Pamela started to argue almost every day until the terrible events of January 6, 2001. On January 6, 2001, Ronnie Hendricks stated he heard a gunshot coming from inside their house while standing on their porch. He didn't take long to contact 911 at precisely 5 o'clock. At that point, the DeWitt County Police showed up. Pamela Shelley was unconscious on the bathroom floor when the police and EMTs arrived inside. There was blood all over, the gun was on the counter, and she had been shot in the right temple. The EMTs told Ronnie Hendrick that it would take them an hour to get to the nearest hospital. Ronnie said he knew a quicker way to get there by taking the back roads, and he vowed to go with them. Although Pamela was not well, she was still alive. But on January 7th, the doctors pronounced her brain dead despite having her on life support. When Pamela's ex-husband Jesse showed up at the hospital, he took the children and brought them back to Arkansas. On January 8, 2001, the medical examiner concluded that Pamela had committed suicide. It was determined that the gunshot wound was self-inflicted because it made extremely close contact with the flesh. But the suicide scenario was rejected by Sheriff Carl Bowen, who took over the case. Jesse Suggs admitted to Sheriff Bowen that he struggled to get his act together, which was the reason their relationship was difficult. Jesse replied that he had shared a bed with Pamela the night before she left for Texas when asked when he had last seen her. He went on to say that he had traveled to Texas in order to return his children to Arkansas, and that Pamela had planned to return with them on January 6th. Jesse knew that Kayla, Pamela, and Ronnie were often having problems. Jesse consented to undergo a polygraph as part of the investigation, which he passed. Jesse was ruled out as a suspect because Pamela Shelley was shot at his mother's house in Arkansas, 800 miles away. Ronnie Hendrick was the second individual the detective spoke with. He reported to the police that he heard what sounded like a gunshot while standing outdoors on the porch. Then he stormed inside and saw Pamela bleeding profusely from a head wound as she lay on the floor. He asserted that he had shielded Kayla, age 12, and Dustin, age 9, from the graphic scene. Ronnie added that Pamela and the children had started packing that morning in preparation for their trip back to Arkansas. He said Pamela Shelley had been depressed about returning to Arkansas. Nevertheless, family issues forced the move, especially given the tension between him and Kayla. Pamela didn't want to go back, but Ronnie told the police she had no choice since she was scared of losing her kids. The detectives were troubled by the discrepancies in the case, notwithstanding the autopsy results. They questioned why, if Pamela Shelley intended to commit suicide, she would have crammed her entire possessions into a car. Furthermore, the portrayal of a suicidal young woman by Ronnie Hendricks didn't match the information that the authorities had about Pamela Shelley. Former DeWitt County Sheriff's Office Deputy Sheriff Carl Bowen speculates that Pamela Shelley's death might have been the consequence of a homicide or accident. Ronnie Hendrick consented to take a polygraph exam when asked by officials to obtain more information, but he missed 3 scheduled dates. He either rescheduled or didn't show up at all before going entirely missing. The medical examiner concluded the inquiry and declared suicide to be the cause of death, closing the case. Sheriff Carl Bowen, however, chose to re-examine the case 7 years after Pamela Shelley had away, since he had never thought it was a suicide. Still, Pamela's medical records were collected by Sheriff Carl Bowen so that they could be properly and thoroughly examined. It was found that Pamela Shelley was taking low-grade antidepressants to treat her frequent stress-induced seizures. Killers spoke with Sheriff Bowen and admitted that, on January 4th, 2 days before to her mother's discovery, Ronnie had attacked her. When Kayla protected her mother from Ronnie, she claims that he attacked her and severely darkened her eyes. They went to a hospital thereafter. Pamela made the decision to tell the doctors that she had fallen into a coffee table with the help of the kids. Since the kids really wanted to return to Arkansas on January 6th, Pamela decided to do so following the incident. Following this discovery, in 2008, Ronnie Hendrick was located at the county jail by Sheriff Carl Bowen. Ronnie struck his girlfriend, resulting in his arrest. Then, he was questioned again about what had happened on January 6, 2001. His stories had discrepancies that the police discovered. In addition, he had to undergo a polygraph examination, which exposed his deceit. Although the detectives had suspicions about something, they lacked sufficient proof to hold Ronnie accountable for Pamela's death. But the case remained unsolved for another 4 years, until 2012, when Pamela Shelley's case was picked up by a TV program that looked at cold cases. They tried to look for fingerprints and DNA on the gun. The results were shocking when they were revealed. The gun belonged to Ronnie, but neither Ronnie's nor Pamela's DNA was discovered on it. The police and TV show now believe that all traces of DNA had been removed from the handgun. Sheriff Carl Bowen was now receiving assurances that Pamela had not committed suicide. He proceeded to speak with his mother Shirley and Pamela's ex-husband Jesse Suggs once more in August 2012. Shirley told the sheriff that she and Jesse had been using a burner phone for covert communication when Pamela was in Cairo, Texas. In response to a question about whether she thought Pamela had committed suicide, Shirley said she thought Ronnie Hendricks had shot her. Jesse Suggs claims that he spoke with Pamela over the phone about 30 minutes before to her shooting death. He said he heard Ronnie come in, took the phone, and informed Jesse that Pamela would only be going home to Arkansas in a pine box. The reason was revealed, and these disclosures were starting to get disturbing. It was all the detectives needed to present their case to a grand jury. When the medical examiner discovered that Ronnie Hendricks had abused Pamela, Kyla, and other women he had dated, he quickly changed Pamela Shelley's cause of death from suicide to uncertain. 11 years have elapsed since the death of Pamela Shelley when this event occurred. Ronnie Hendrick was accused of killing Pamela Shelley in the autumn of 2012. Ultimately, Ronnie entered a guilty plea and received a 22-year prison sentence, 12 years after Pamela passed away. Terry Becker. A woman's lifeless body was discovered on December 6, 1975, in a field near 100th Avenue and Lowell Boulevard in Westminster, Colorado. 2 people on their motorcycles discovered her. She may be recognized as Terry Becker since her clothes and personal belongings were also discovered at the scene. At the time, she was 20 years old. Terry was born and raised in Casper, Wyoming, and after completing high school, relocated to the Denver metropolitan region. Friends and family recognized Terry as a free spirit. She led an adventurous life. Terry cherished both painting and music listening. Steppenwolf and Three Dog Night were 2 of her favorite bands. After an autopsy, it was determined that she had been beaten and strangled. When Terry last saw her lover at the Adams County Detention Center in Brighton, Colorado, 2 days earlier, she was hitchhiking. The primary detective on the case, Chandra Thurston, a senior criminalist with the Westminster Police Department, claimed that she had been abandoned in the field. When police arrive, an investigation is launched. Subsequently, suspects are examined over time, but nothing comes to light. The case was abandoned. A similar crime occurred in 1991. In her apartment on the 1000 block of West Monroe Avenue, close to Owens and H Street in Las Vegas, Nevada, Sherry Bridgewater was attacked and killed. The mother of two boys, 31 years of age, was discovered by two other ladies, a friend and a relative. Despite the investigating team's best efforts over the years to solve the case, it ultimately fell cold. 12 years later, in 2003, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation successfully extracted DNA from a fragment of Terry's case material. The Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, database received a sample from an unidentified individual, but no match was discovered. The Las Vegas Metro Police Department added the perpetrator's DNA to their database 10 years later, in 2013. The two cases were related because the sample matched Terry's offender. Both instances had no suspects prior to the DNA discovery. Technology and genetic genealogy in 2019 suggested a potential man. Veteran Thomas Martin Elliott has a long criminal past. He was given a 6-year prison term for breaking and entering into a home in Lakewood, Colorado. After being freed in 1981, he assaulted a 13-year-old girl in Carson City, Nevada, with serious intent. He was given a life sentence in prison with the possibility of release. After gaining his freedom 10 years later, he emerged as the main suspect in the unsolved Las Vegas case. On October 30th, 1991, 5 months later, he shot himself to death. He was 40 years old. Because of his brief military service, he was interred in the Southern Nevada Veterans Memorial Cemetery. Elliott was not a suspect that the Las Vegas police could look into further due to a lack of resources. After requesting aid from the Vegas Justice League, a group that has assisted the department in cracking other cold cases, in October 2023, they were able to secure funds from them, which permitted the police to exhume Elliott's remains in order to obtain a DNA sample. It was confirmed in 2024. For Terry and Sherry's instances, it was a match. The fact that Elliott was adopted by his mother's second husband presented a challenge for the identification and matching of the DNA. His real father and birth mother, Nancy West, later got divorced and remarried. Although Elliott's relationship to Terry was unknown, the investigators discovered that he and Sherry were frequent attendees of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Senior criminalist Chandra Thurston of the Westminster Police Department said that knowing at last that someone's name was responsible for Terry's abuse was nearly a big relief. You undoubtedly had moments during this when you thought, "I'll never be able to figure this out. We will never be able to solve this." Much relief has been felt, and I hope she understands that we did not give up on her. And we kept working until justice was served. Even if things stay this way, we still want justice for her, to know that she mattered, and to know that we have always loved her. There have been many ups and downs in this case, according to Westminster Police Commander in Investigations A.C. Stutson. Many times we were so near, yet it would disappear. Terry's brother David Becker is the sole surviving family member. He stated the following and is a resident of Texas. "I have no words to express how appreciative I am. I want to say how much I respect the Westminster Police Department. It is amazing that the DNA can match and provide closure after 45 years, and for that I am thankful. It is comforting to know that they are not robbing another sibling of their life. That gives me some comfort." For Westminster Police, the case represented a revolution. It was the first cold case they had solved, as well as the oldest. According to Westminster Chief Norm Hubbard, who has represented the organization for many years, the case began in 1975, and it gives the agency great satisfaction and a great feeling of success to be able to conclude it today and represent all the men and women who worked on this case. We are also relieved that we could get this resolved for the family. Regretfully, Sherry's parents died before the person who had murdered her was found. Lieutenant Johansson of the LVMPD stated that her family was able to have some closure and that the police were able to contact both of her adult sons. In order to determine whether any more incidents could be linked to the same suspect, he said that the department is going back and reviewing records. Kenneth and Barbara Martin. In Portland, Oregon, in 1958, Kenneth and Barbara Martin resided with their 3 daughters, Barbie, Virginia, and Susan. Donald, their 28-year-old son, was stationed with the Navy in New York. In search of a Christmas tree, Kenneth and Barbara loaded up their 3 daughters into their red Ford station wagon on December 7, 1958, and drove to Columbia Gorge. People who knew the family noted that Kenneth disliked driving at night. Therefore, it seemed strange that he departed so late on a chilly winter's day. They departed at around 1 in the afternoon. The family had no intention of going back to their house. Kenneth was supposed to work at Heckle's Electric Home Service Company on December 9th, but he did not show up. Kenneth's supervisor then reported the family missing. When the Martins' home was searched by the police, they discovered that nothing had been tampered with. There was a load of laundry in the washing machine, dishes in the drying rack to drain, and Kenneth's Santa Claus suit from the night before spread out. A petrol station employee saw the family stop at his station to buy 5 gallons of petrol during their initial investigation. The petrol station was located 40 miles east of Portland near Cascade Locks. A credit card bill verifying the sighting was delivered to the Martin family's residence 2 weeks later. A waitress at Hood River's Paradise Snack Bar called Clara reported serving the family shortly after this sighting at approximately 5 o'clock in the evening. The waitress said that the family left for the Dales after their supper. The family was spotted by multiple drivers in Washington state along the north bank of the Columbia River. In the Dales, a switcher noticed tire tracks that led off a precipice in February 1959. The footprints were identified by the police as belonging to the Martin family's vehicle. The officers also examined paint chips that they had discovered at the scene. The paint was found to match the model of Martin's family car. Sonar was used to scour the river, but nothing indicated the presence of the car. 3 months later, on May 1st, 1959, something substantial was hooked onto the anchor of a river drilling rig near the tire tracks. But the object moved away from the anchor before it could be taken out and examined. A fisherman and his spouse reported spotting what they thought to be 2 dead floating in the river close to Cascade Locks the next day. Susan's body was discovered by the police on May 3rd, close to Camus, Washington, on the north bank of the Columbia River. Virginia's body would be discovered the following day close to Bonneville Dam. The Multnomah County Medical Examiner conducted an autopsy on both girls. A technician claimed to have observed what seemed to be bullet holes in their skulls. The medical examiner's report states that drowning was the cause of death because no such injuries were discovered. The cause of death was ruled to be between 6 and 7 p.m. after autopsies revealed that both girls had consumed hamburgers and fries. The waitress at the Paradise Snack Bar had spotted the family around 5 p.m. Susan's outfit also had metal traces on it. Sheriff Rupert Gilmuth came to the conclusion that the oil rig had flipped over the Martin family vehicle, and that when it had done so, it had unlocked one of the car's doors, letting the bodies of Susan and Virginia escape to the surface. Once more, sonar and divers were used to search the river in an attempt to locate the automobile and the remaining family members, but to no avail. The remains of Barbara, and Kenneth were never discovered. While some police officers thought Martin's car had driven off the cliff by accident, others suspected foul play. A stolen white Chevrolet with Cascade locks was discovered by the police on December 9th, the day the Martin family was reported missing. The car was registered in Venice, California, which is near Los Angeles. Roy Light and an additional man who remained nameless were taken into custody the next day in relation to the pilfered car. The 2 individuals had previously been arrested and served time for separate offenses. Both males had visited the Paradise Snack Bar on the same day, and at the same time as the Martin family, it was later discovered. Additionally, the waitress mentioned that the 2 guys had departed at the same time as the Martin family. Nevertheless, the authorities did not follow up on this tip. A .38 Colt Commander handgun was discovered a few days later, not far from the location of the pilfered Chevrolet. The gun appeared to have been used to strike someone because it had dried blood on it. The Mayer and Frank retail shop was identified by the serial number of the rifle. Later on, it was discovered that the gun was one of the many goods that Donald, Kenneth's son, was accused of stealing while he was employed at the Mayer and Frank department store. It was reported that Donald's interactions with his family were tense. Donald stayed in New York and suspiciously never took part in any of the searches conducted for his family. A woman's glove was discovered on December 28, 1958, not far from the location of the stolen Chevrolet. The gloves looked just like the ones Barbara used to wear, according to a family friend. It was never established, though, whether or not she truly owned the gloves. Although there was never enough proof to link Donald to his family's abduction, he was nevertheless thought to be a suspect. Multnomah County speculated that the family's disappearance may have been the result of foul play. The remains of Kenneth, Barbara, and Barbary have never been located, despite no more searches being done. Moving on to the next case. Tara Calico. On the 15th of June, 1989, a woman in Port St. Joe, Florida, exited Route 98 and entered the parking lot of a convenience store. The woman noticed a Polaroid photograph that was laying on the ground with its face down. Nevertheless, when she flipped the photograph over after taking it, she was taken aback to discover a young woman and a youngster having their mouths covered and appearing to be chained. Later on, she stated that the photograph was discovered in a parking spot where a white Toyota cargo vehicle without windows had been parked when she arrived at the store. Roadblocks were set up by the authorities in an attempt to stop the vehicle. However, the individual was never apprehended and was never recognized. In the outset, it was believed that the boy in the photograph was Michael Henley. However, in 1990, the case took a sudden and conclusive turn when the remains of Michael Henley were discovered. They came to the conclusion that he had become disoriented in the woods and had perished as a result of prolonged exposure to the elements. It was speculated that the woman depicted in the photograph was Tara Calico. Tara, who was 19 years old at the time of her disappearance, was a sophomore at the University of New Mexico's Valencia campus when someone reported her missing. Tara was last seen leaving her house on the morning of her abduction, and she was planning to go for a bike ride along Highway 47. The majority of the time, she was accompanied by her mother, Patty. Patty, on the other hand, decided to cease attending her daughter after she received the impression that she was being followed by a driver. According to reports, she suggested that Tara would consider carrying mace, but Tara did not agree with the suggestion. Due to the fact that Tara did not arrive at her house by midday, her mother went looking for her along the typical path, but she was unable to locate her somewhere. Approximately at this time, she made contact with the authorities. Despite the fact that a number of people saw Tara riding her bicycle, she has never been located, and no one has personally observed what is believed to be her kidnapping. This mystery has not yet been resolved. Back to the Polaroid photograph that was discovered. The snapshot was discovered approximately 1,600 miles away from the location where Tara was last seen. Nonetheless, there were a few major similarities between the two locations. It was clear that the young woman in the photograph had the appropriate complexion and hair color. A scar that Tara had sustained as a result of an automobile accident was matched by a discolored patch that was located on the right leg of the young woman. Scotland Yard conducted an examination of the photograph and came to the conclusion that the woman in the picture was Tara. However, a second analysis conducted by the Los Alamos laboratory came to a different conclusion. The snapshot was examined by the FBI, but the results were inconclusive. There is no information available on the identities of the people depicted on the Polaroid. Despite this, it is possible that this photograph serves as a terrifying reminder of a crime that occurred almost 30 years ago and has not been solved to this day. Teleka Patrick. Teleka Patrick, a first-year resident in the medical school program at Western Michigan University, was last seen on December 5th in the Kalamazoo parking lot of her employer, Voorhees Medical Center. Patrick got a lift to the downtown Radisson Hotel from a male coworker after wrapping up her shift at Voorhees about 7 o'clock in the evening. She attempted to check into her room while wearing a black sweatshirt and black pants, as seen on camera at the hotel. She eventually left with only $20 and no identity. It was shortly after 8 p.m. when she returned to the medical center to pick up her automobile via the hotel shuttle service. Around 10 o'clock at night, Indiana State Police received a report about an automobile driving strangely, and they discovered her car in a ditch off Interstate 90 in Portage, Indiana. Her wallet and identity were in the car, but the car keys were missing. The car was unharmed, save for a flat tire. When she didn't show up for work the next morning, she was reported missing. On December 12th, the state police brought a bloodhound to the spot, and the dog followed her path back to the motorway before coming to a stop. What led her to go more than 100 miles west without warning her friends and family, and without her cell phone or pocketbook, is the question that needs to be answered. Although nothing noteworthy was found on Patrick's phone records, police claim that the day before she vanished, she may have been irritated by a phone call. Subsequent research revealed a number of videos on YouTube showing Patrick serenading a possible love interest at her Gull Run Apartments residence. In an early November video, Sandra 3000 Cassie shared a meal she had prepared for the guest along with some words. She calls the person she is speaking to in another video baby and love. According to Teleka's mother, she didn't know who her daughter was referencing in the videos and doesn't believe she was in a sexual relationship when she vanished. As Patrick and his ex-husband haven't spoken in 2 years, they are likewise not considered suspects. It appears from the film that she was allegedly stalking a well-known gospel singer, the subject of her irrational romantic videos. After Patrick was accused of stalking her for at least a year, Pastor Marvin Sapp, a Grammy-nominated vocalist, obtained a restraining order against her. She tried to get in touch with his family, sent him several emails and tweets every day, and even picked her college and career depending on where he lived. Sapp purportedly showed 400 pages of letters from Patrick, to which he claims he never replied. Unpredictably, Patrick's second video post is called Surprise. She vanished a few days after that upload in the final video. According to her family, Teleka was not mentally sick. Her body was discovered by a fisherman in Lake Charles, Indiana, on April 6, 2014. Her cause of death was identified as drowning following an autopsy. Even though they were convinced there was foul play, the investigation was closed as an accident. Moving on to the next case. Mildred Metheny. In 1985, Mildred Metheny, then 78 years old, resided in Lake Worth, Florida. She had dementia. Mildred was a nurse by profession. Someone walking by on the evening of April 27th found Mildred suffering from potentially fatal injuries. She had been hit in the head and face, leaving her bloodied and nude. Her dentures were discovered in the soil, and her abandoned clothing was all over the place. After being brought to the hospital, she tragically passed away a few days later from her wounds. Investigators made an effort to compile a timetable. They discovered that Mildred was last seen at her residence in the 1300 block of Crestwood Boulevard in Lake Worth Beach, where she shared a home with her younger sister, Gladys Nolan. Mildred then appeared to stroll off, as she had done previously. She was reported missing at 4:30 p.m. Then, at 10 o'clock at night, a bystander discovered her unconscious on Jupiter's ancient Indian town road, more than 30 miles from her home. Witnesses stated that they saw Mildred pull into a brown Oldsmobile sedan at the Lucerne Avenue and Dixie Highway crossroads. Witnesses informed detectives that the driver identified himself as Mildred's neighbor and promised to assist her in returning home. They were unaware of the precise events that transpired between that time and her discovery. Unfortunately, the case remained unsolved for many years in the absence of credible leads or suspects. That was prior until recently. Using genetic genealogy and the DNA they had taken from Mildred's remains in 1985, investigators were able to identify the suspect. They recognized him as Richard Curtis Lang, age 61, in March 2021. His home is at Boynton Beach, Florida, which is not far from Mildred's residence. After that, he was sent without bond to the Palm Beach County Jail. He engaged a defense lawyer and denied any role in the crime. This is what the lawyer said in a statement. Mr. Lang strongly disputes the accusations made by the Palm Beach County State's Attorney's Office today, and we intend to vigorously contest the forensic evidence that Mr. Lang is said to have provided. There is nothing in Mr. Lang's record that suggests he has a tendency towards such heinous behavior. Additionally, when we get ready for trial, we will argue that, considering his age and health, he ought to be released to home detention. Richard was 25 years old at the time of the incident, so it's unclear how their paths may have met. Richard has a criminal record. Following his apprehension in Palm Beach County on a weapons possession charge in 2012, his DNA was sent to Cody's. Investigators are certain he is the one responsible, even though he denies any participation. He was a local and a convicted offender, and it's difficult to explain away the discovery of his DNA within her body. After the arrest, this is what Mildred's son had to say. It has been a while. I am grateful to the cold case team for locating the evil SOB. He mentioned that his mother has experience working with mental health patients at a hospital in Little Rock, Arkansas. She loved spending time with her family, cooking, and sewing. Richard Lang, 62, was found guilty on February 1st, 2023, of killing Mildred and abusing her. Restricted to a wheelchair, Lang occasionally dozed off during the trial's plotting moments. He remained silent following the verdict and was led out of the courtroom by bailiffs. This ultimately put an end to a 2-day trial in a 38-year-old unsolved case. On April 4th, 2023, Circuit Judge Delia Weiss is set to sentence Lang to prison. Russian flying girl. During the time that he was out walking his dog, a man carried a video camera with him, which allows him to capture this fuzzy video. Every single one of these events takes place in a forest in Russia. The movie begins with the dog as the primary subject of attention. However, the camera quickly shifts to the right and captures a silhouette of a young girl floating in the air in a horizontal position with her upper body raised. According to appearances, the parent of the young child is lying on the ground. Upon closer inspection, it is even possible to make out the creepy child's cold breath as it travels through the icy air to its destination. The passerby is so shocked by the girl's behavior at this point that he even pretends to drop his phone, which causes the camera to shake. This is because the girl is acting in such a horrible manner. It takes a few moments for the camera to become stable again, and it is at this time that we witness the flying girl being caught by her parent. With their hands clasped together, the shocked couple flees. The man who was walking his dog reported that his dog began to chase the two individuals, but the dog was unable to keep up with them. This made the incident much more peculiar than it already was. There is also a stabilized version of this tape, which is causing some who are skeptical to reconsider their beliefs that this video is a scam. A number of the first assertions presented the idea that the girl was suspended in the air in some kind. Due to the fact that the child could not have been hanging from a rope that was suspended above her without a crane being there, it is highly unlikely that something like this could have occurred. Furthermore, it is common knowledge that magicians employ tricks that include horizontal lines in order to make them appear as though they are floating. However, considering the enormous amount of preparation that would be required, this does not appear to be the case here. There is still a lot of mystery around this video, despite the fact that it has been around for quite some time. Some people are of the opinion that this is nothing more than an elaborate hoax, while others are of the opinion that levitation may be accomplished via the practice of meditation and religious rituals. Moving on to the next case. Mary Ferns. The 88-year-old Mary Ferns, sometimes known as May, informed her husband early on June 17, 2008, that she was going shopping in Livingston, Scotland's Armandvale shopping centre, which is now called the Centre for New Tights. The 83-year-old Bill remembered that his wife left at around 9:30 a.m., but she never returned. Bill contacted friends and family later that night to find out if anyone had seen the retired nurse. After that, he reported her missing to the local police and prayed that she would soon return, unharmed. But May vanished from sight and was never heard from again. The 88-year-old was last seen on camera, according to detectives, when she was seen strolling down Edinburgh's Princes Street, some 17 miles distant. Although May appeared at ease and content, it is still a mystery why she traveled to Edinburgh in the first place, given there were several shops nearby where she could have bought tights. The 88-year-old's disappearance was deemed strange by the case's investigators, who also mentioned they were still unaware of May's mode of transportation to Edinburgh. Nevertheless, according to some sources, was saw boarding a bus to the capital city of Scotland. Under dense undergrowth, skeletal remains were found by investigators in April 2011 at Craig's Hill, Livingston, near the Almond River. Since January, they had been scouring the area. The remains were partially buried between the Livingston Rugby Club and on Vancouver Avenue, less than a mile from Mary's residence. But on February 23, 2012, it became clear that the remains were not, as investigators had first thought, Mary's. In reality, they belonged to a man who disappeared 15 years prior. In 1996, James Adams, then 58, vanished from sight. Despite his health issues, his death is not thought to be suspicious. Not much further information is known on Mary's case. She was mentioned in a BBC missing persons appeal in 2009, and her daughter sent a help request a year later. But since the bones were found in 2011, there have been no new developments in the case. Mary Ferns, an 88-year-old white woman, is characterized as having green eyes and short gray hair. She has a thin physique, is 5 feet 3 inches tall, and frequently has a brass handle. She had on a brown skirt, brown shoes, and a brown three-quarter jacket on the day she vanished. In addition, she had a brown purse on her arm. Moving on to the next case. Larry and Amanda McClure. Early in 2019, 31-year-old Amanda McClure and her 38-year-old partner, John McGuire, a father of 5, were residing in Owatonna, Minnesota. Amanda decided that she and John should visit Sky Gusty, West Virginia, since she had lately gotten in touch with her estranged biological father. So they hopped in their car and drove off. The two did not, however, reach Indiana before their car broke down. Amanda contacted her 55-year-old father, Larry McClure, and requested that he come get them. He consented and brought Amanda Choudhury, Amanda's 32-year-old sister, along. Larry had been incarcerated for 17 and a half years for the first-degree sexual assault of a minor. He was only recently released from prison. When Amanda was 9 years old and Anna was 10, their father sexually assaulted one of Larry's children or another member of the family. After his release, he was contacted by both of his daughters. Anna had stated that she had only lived with Larry for a short time before to their departure to pick up Amanda and John from Indiana. The group made the decision to buy supplies in Sky Gusty so they could make their own crystal meth. But instead of following a precise recipe, they chose to wing it when trying to create the medication. But the material didn't crystallize the way they had anticipated, so they deemed the batch to be defective. John came to the conclusion that he and Amanda should make a permanent move within the course of the following few days. He declared his love for her and his desire to wed her. However, Amanda's father was not happy to hear this information. Anna said that Larry became silent furious. He frequently pulled his youngest daughter into a corner and had quiet, private chats with her in the days that followed. Later on, Anna would claim that she didn't know what they were discussing and that she hadn't asked. Based on the events that followed, it appeared likely that Larry was gradually turning Amanda against her partner. The party enjoyed a bottle of wine, some steak and potatoes, and a fun day together on Valentine's Day. However, when a little trust game was played, things became worse. John's legs are being tied to a kitchen chair in this situation. Anna said, "I don't know when Larry sat down," describing the apparent moment of change in everything. "I'll never be able to adequately explain that smile." As he stooped over and tried to untie himself, John seemed to sense this abrupt change in the air. But just as he was about to finish, Amanda snatched the wine bottle from the table and smashed it over his head, knocking the glass over. Larry then restrained John's arms. After that, John, who was 38 years old, endured what can only be described as torture. The group badgered him mercilessly, Larry leading the charge and wanting to know John's real identity. John was forced to refute the father of five's claim that he was a federal agent and provide his social security number as evidence, but he was powerless to stop them. All three of the family members severely assaulted John and interrogated him several times over the course of a few days. After some time, Larry gave Anna the order to inject John with the faulty batch of meth they had made. She placed it into 2 syringes and injected John's carotid artery with each of them. Though she was certain that this would result in his demise, it didn't. In fact, it gave John more energy and encouraged his tenacity. He kept denying all the charges made against him by his family. Ultimately, the family killed John 2 or 3 days following their Valentine's Day dinner. Larry restrained him while Amanda covered his head with a bag and Anna used a rope to choke him. After John was dead, they buried their victim by digging a shallow grave close to Larry's trailer and covering his body with trash bags. His possessions were thrown into a bonfire. Amanda started what Anna referred to as a relationship with their father after John was killed. Police in West Virginia filed a report alleging it was sexual in nature. After 6 days, the gang started to think that John wasn't quite dead, a paranoid hallucination that was probably brought on by the medications they were doing. After excavating the body and hammering wooden stakes into it, the 3 dismembered John and buried his remains in a side yard. In the hopes of accelerating the rates of decomposition, they threw quicklime on him. It took Amanda and Larry less than 2 months to make the decision to travel to Virginia and exchange vows. Since incestuous marriage was forbidden, they entered a fictitious identity for the bride's father. In her capacity as the couple's witness, Anna was also present. By the time John's family expressed their concerns, it was June 2019. In the hopes that someone had seen him someplace, they posted information about him on social media, asked about, and filed a missing persons report. They didn't seem to know that the 38-year-old and his girlfriend had left town. Amanda persisted in cashing John's social security benefits in the meantime. After some time, the family relocated to Kentucky, where Larry was supposed to register as a sexual offender under the law, but he never did. The horrifying tale of the 3 came to an end as a result of his inability to do so. In September 2019, Larry was arrested by Kentucky police for failing to register as a sex offender. When asked about his prior criminal history, he readily acknowledged to being involved in a murder and blamed both of his daughters for it. Asserted that Amanda was the mastermind behind the whole thing and gave thorough explanations of the murder. He also provided the location of John's body to the investigators. Authorities discovered the 30-year-old's remains on September 24th. Additionally, Amanda and Anna were also taken into custody early in October. In exchange for testifying against her family, Amanda was charged with second-degree murder, while Anna and Larry faced first-degree charges. The 3 family members entered guilty pleas to the allegations. Larry wrote, "I just want it over," in a letter around this time. No trial funded by tax dollars. Adding, "All I can do is hope for mercy on this." He continued his pleading for pardon. "I will apologize for my involvement in this." He never revealed the crime's motivation. In August 2020, Larry received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for his involvement in the horrifying crime. Amanda testified about her father's actions and her assumption that he wanted John dead so he could marry her at Amanda's sentencing trial in October of that same year. She claimed that because her father didn't want anybody else around her, he killed her boyfriend. Amanda's adoptive parents and she discussed how much power the 55-year-old had over her. The court informed her that although the two had a history of abuse, it did not absolve her of culpability for what she did, adding, "I don't think you're taking full responsibility for killing John. You're attributing it to your dad. The amount of time you will serve is insufficient to make up for the suffering you have brought about." Amanda received a 40-year prison term. At her sentencing hearing in March 2021, Anna stated that she joined the crime because her father had threatened to harm her and her kids. She was also given a 40-year prison term. Thanks for watching.